Hey, what's going on, DDO players? Axel here, back for another part of my DDO Retrospective series. This is a series where I take a look back at prior updates in DDO, give my thoughts, and share my experiences. So last time we ended with Update 21. This time we will start with Update 22, which was Pirates of the Thunder Sea. Pirates of the Thunder Sea was the big epic Three-Barrel Cove update. This updated the Three-Barrel Cove content with epic difficulty. Now, not all the quests were epic, but many of them were. We also saw a new quest called Precious Cargo, and we saw an epic version of the Three-Barrel Cove wilderness area. Now, a lot of new things here. We saw the introduction of a new mechanic with airship battles. Beginning with this update, you could now use a ballista, you could shoot down airships in the sky, and the new quest Precious Cargo, which was the capstone of the epic Three-Barrel Cove story arc, actually involved an airship battle where you were on an airship and you could shoot across an enemy airship. So very cool little mechanic. A lot of players enjoyed it. I think it's fun. There's a little I think a lot of players thought there'd be a little more to it. The developers really hyped up the airship battles before this update, and when the update came out, it turns out all it really is you go to a ballista, you pull it back, you have to aim it, which takes a little bit of skill because you have to know the trajectory of the ballista and how it drops, so you might have to aim a little bit over your target. So it's okay. I enjoy it. I think it's pretty cool, but it's probably not quite what it was hyped up to be. We also saw this mechanic in the Three-Barrel Cove wilderness area. There are now enemy airships around different portions of the map you can shoot down as well. We saw the introduction of heroic and epic pirate-themed sagas. We also saw the introduction of Storm the Beaches epic difficulty. So they updated that old House D quest with epic difficulty. We saw the introduction of a new fighting style in Update 22, which was the single weapon fighting line. Single weapon fighting is you have to hold a single-handed weapon in one hand, and in the other hand you can hold nothing, a buckler, or an orb. Single weapon fighting is it's sort of like a mix between two weapon fighting and two-handed fighting. It seems like you can get a little bit more versatility than you can with either of those fighting styles as well. You can hold either an orb, or you can get a little bit defense from a buckler. And this single weapon fighting line was created in large part to go along with the new swashbuckler enhancements, which were introduced in Update 22. Swashbuckler was and not only was Swashbuckler introduced, but the Bard class was passed in Update 22, and this was the first of the class passes, a process that is still ongoing today. The Bards were the first class to be passed. Before Update 22, Bards were a lot more of a support class. They're more a jack-of-all-trades support class. You could also build them as casters. Now, you can still do that today, but Update 22, especially Swashbuckler, gave them a lot more DPS than they had previously. All of a sudden, Bards were now a very viable melee DPS class. And from my experiences, Swashbuckler is still hands down the most popular Bard enhancement line today. And when I see a Bard in game, this is usually the enhancement line they take. See a few spell singers, but for the most part, I do see Swashbucklers for Bards. We also saw a guild level increase. Cap was increased to 200, and we saw a complete revamp of the guild airships. Before Update 22, there was a big problem with airship buffs. They were a big time sink in the game. They only lasted an hour. They did not pause in public areas, and unlike today where you have one single lever to get all your buffs, before Update 22 you had to actually run around the entire ship, top deck, bottom deck, everywhere. You have to hit your buffs one by one by one by one, and this was very time consuming. And like I said before, they only lasted an hour, and they did not pause in public areas. So every single hour, if you wanted those buffs, you had to run back to your airships. And this wouldn't have been such a big problem if the airship buffs weren't so good and the population didn't see the airship buffs as a necessity to have on all the time. But because the population adopted that mentality that we have to have airship buffs on all the time, these became a big time sink. You saw this especially if you would run in pugs a lot. People would say, "Oh, I'll be right there. I got to go grab my ship buffs first." airship buffs turned into this just big time sink, which fortunately they solved that problem with update 22, because now instead of having to run across the whole ship, you can get all your buffs in one lever right in the middle of the ship, very conveniently located. Also, the buffs now do pause in public areas post update 22. So if you're waiting for your raid group to fill, you wouldn't have to go refresh your ship buffs twice. And they, of course, last a lot longer today. It depends on a variety of factors, I believe, like guild level, but they can last up to 3-4 hours, I believe. And to fit with the pirate-themed update, we also saw Crystal Cove brought back at this time. That's all for update 22. Let's move on to update 23, which was the Mark of Death. Update 23 was the big Epic Necro 4 update. This is where we saw Epic Necro 4 epified. We also saw the Orchard of the Macabre Wilderness area epified, and we saw a new raid called the Mark of Death, which was a reworked version of the Epic Abbot raid. Or it was a reworked Epic version of the Heroic Epic raid. Let me correct myself. So, this was an adventure pack that a lot of people want epicked. I was really happy they epicked it. I thought it was very much worthy of being epicked. The big thing with this update was not only Mark of Death, the new raid, but we also saw something called Armor Up, which was a huge change in the game, and one of the biggest milestones in the game, one of the biggest in the game's history, I think. Armor Up revamped heavy armor. Before update 23, and for quite a while in the game, heavy armor was just not working correctly. Let's just say what it is. Heavy armor just didn't work because it worked on the basis of pen and paper with AC, and what happened in the real game is that after a certain level, or after a certain point in the game, there was no point in wearing heavy armor because you would never be able, unless you invested like everything into it and you really specialized in it, you were going to get hit anyways. And PRR, MRR didn't exist prior to update 23, so you didn't get any extra benefits. So everyone just wore robes. And up to this point, this is why everyone went with evasion, because evasion was the only viable way to mitigate damage prior to update 23. Like I said, heavy armor didn't do much unless you specialized in it, because you were going to get hit anyway. So it was better to go the evasion route and at least save some of the damage that you could be taking from spells and such. But with update 23, it changed all that. Heavy armor now gave you a base PRR, MRR application just from wearing it. So now you actually got a reduction in the damage you're taking just from wearing heavy armor. So all of a sudden, heavy armor was extremely viable. And it was actually too viable because they have since update 23 have nerfed heavy armor, I believe a few times actually, because what update 23 did unfortunately was switch the pendulum. Before update 23, everyone wore robes, everyone went evasion, but after update 23, it seemed like almost everyone wore heavy armor because it was just so good. So unfortunately, they kind of swung to the other side of the fence with this update, but they have corrected that to a large extent. And I think it's in a fairly balanced state today, although I would still say heavy armor is better today. Especially today as we're going towards all the high spike damage we get. But anyways, that's a different topic. We also saw the introduction of melee power and range power. We saw a new enhancement tree called the Harper Agent. We also saw, with this update, we saw revamped fighter and paladin enhancement line, the Vanguard, which finally gave Sword and Board an offensive option. Prior to update 23, your DPS was just going to be gimped if you went Sword and Board. It was not a viable offensive stance to have. It was only for tanking for the most part. And really, prior to update 23, like I said, unless you heavily specialized in it, heavy armor wasn't, Sword and Board really wasn't good even for a tank. So, but that update 23 changed all that. Vanguards are an excellent enhancement line, extremely viable. Let's move on to, let's talk about the raid a little bit, Mark of Death. Mark of Death was a raid that was fairly popular, especially the Epic Litany trinket. A lot of people really wanted this, and it was best in slot when this raid was released. One key problem, though, came to light with the Mark of Death raid. it's extremely short, and we saw the abuse of raid bypass timers. I think this raid, more than anyone, kind of woke the devs up in that the raid bypass timers were a problem, and a lot of players got concerned about it because of the prior updates where, unfortunately, way too many of them got into the economy. You could farm out your 20th list in a matter of a few hours and get your loot. So this raid did not have that great of a lifespan. I mean, I still see it run sometimes, but I think for the most part, the raid didn't last too long because you could get through it so quickly, and especially with raid bypass timers. The raid itself was extremely short. You can get it done in less than 10 minutes. So it was extremely fast to get to it was extremely easy to get to your 20th list quickly. It was difficult though. That's one thing I really liked about Epic Elite. Mark of Death is extremely difficult, and to this day is still extremely difficult. You have to have a very good group to go in there today and get that done. Let's move on to update 24, which was the Heart of Madness. The Heart of Madness was another adventure pack that was taken off of the Zoriat theme. So the delirium chain we see in the 12, this was an expansion of that. We saw 3 new standalone quests: the Palace of Stone, Passion Madness, and Terminal Delirium. We also saw the Mask of Deception introduced, which is a free-to-play quest in the Forgotten Realms. Unfortunately, this update was a flop. If you want to see my full review for this update and within these prior updates, you can just look below in the description. We're now getting to the point in this retrospective series where I have covered all of this stuff in prior videos. So if you want to check it out in more detail, just look in the description below. But I do think this update was a flop because I see what the developers are trying to do here. They were trying to give us more content in that mid-epic level range because they felt that content was a little bit lacking there. Like there wasn't enough content. But the problem was people at this time were not interested in running stuff mid-epics. They didn't want more content there. What we really wanted was in-game content. People didn't really care that much to have a new quest in the 23 to 24, 25 level range. What we really wanted was in-game content at this point. We had enough leveling content, and most players didn't stick to their character level. Didn't stick to quests that were at or above their character level when they're leveling. Most people, when they level, tend to, at least on the pug scene, tend to run the highest XP quests. So to introduce more content just for the purpose of having more content in that level range didn't really make a lot of sense. Also, the loot was not very good. Players, I know personally when this came out, I really didn't want any of the loot, and I think that was the common consensus among lots of players. I will give the developers some credit though when it comes to the design of the dungeons. I find Palace of Stone to be very amusing, mainly due to the voice acting. Also, while Terminal Delirium may have not had the best reception among the player base, I do admire what they're trying to do there. They took a risk. They're trying to introduce the dance mechanic. They really tried to be creative with the design of the puzzles and the traps. So even though the pack didn't work out that well, I do admire what they were trying to do. And when it comes to Terminal Delirium, I do admire the developers' attempts to step outside the box, and I admire the creativity that went into the design of that dungeon. We also saw the Barbarian Enhancement revamp in this update. This was a huge change. Barbarians were changed completely. But prior to this update, they were one of the weakest classes, if not the weakest, in the game because they didn't have any self-healing. And this update changed all that. Barbarians now had self-healing options and high DPS options. So they were turned from more of a high DPS glass cannon class into kind of your standard high DPS self-healing class. We also saw the introduction of Monster Champions and Mysterious Remnants, and this was a huge deal. I remember when Monster Champions first came out. Actually, for the first few days, Monster Champions were extremely powerful, and they were nerfed quite significantly after only a few days because there was a huge community outroar against them. And if you want to check below, again, I'll link all this in the description, but my initial videos talking about Monster Champions I thought were pretty good. But if you want to see it, I think it's still out there in the forum somewhere. There's a huge, long Monster Champion complaint thread that just had hundreds of pages of players complaining about Monster Champions. So this is, it was a big thing when they introduced, because it changed a lot. Monster Champions introduced a element of randomness into the game. Now, when you turned around the corner, you didn't know if there would be one champion, 3 champions. You didn't know if you would have a hard encounter, an easy encounter. Prior to Monster Champions, once you learned the quest, you kind of knew where the power spikes were. You knew that, yeah, the end boss might be tough. There might be a mini boss in the middle that's tough. But now you could have tough encounters anywhere, and that was the cool randomness mechanic that the devs wanted to introduce into the game, and I'm really happy they did. I really like Monster Champions, and it's really sad to me that they nerfed them. I wanted them to, even today, I wish they would go back to their original form, because after seeing the player outrage, it seems like the developers have shied away from putting more power into Monster Champions, or they've shied away from introducing power or introducing challenge in the game through Monster Champions. They've really shied away from it. We also saw the introduction of the Mysterious Remnants, which, starting with this update, led us all the way up to update 29, where we finally finished the Mysterious Remnant storyline with the Legendary Shroud. But Mysterious Remnants were not introduced right when Champions came out. They were introduced, I think, I don't remember exactly. It might have been a few patches later, but they were not introduced immediately. But one of the reasons they were introduced is to give players some reward for beating a Champions. The big complaint with a lot of players with Monster Champions is, hey, you know, I have to do more work to get the same amount of XP or the same amount of loot that I got before. That upset a lot of players. So now with Mysterious Remnants, you got a bit of a reward that helped make up for that. So we also saw in this update the Mimic Hunt. The Mimic Hunt was a new event. We haven't seen it brought back yet, actually. It has not seen its return since update 24, which is a little strange. I hope it comes back pretty soon this year. But the Mimic Hunt was basically an event where any chest could turn into a mimic that you loot in a quest, and you could collect certain items, certain things from the mimics after killing a mimic, and you could turn these in for a random pull at a prize. It was a really cool mechanic. I think the prize portion of it, with all the randomness, really turned off a lot of players. A lot of players didn't like that, and I'm sure they'll address it when they bring this event back. But the event itself was really cool, and I think they'll fix the whole bank quest in the market, where we can really farm these mimics probably too quickly than it was intended. I bet that'll be fixed. Guys, that's going to be it for this video. I'll start the next video with update 25, but I'll end this one here. Please comment below. Let me know what your thoughts were on updates 22 through 24. Looking forward to reading your comments, and as always, please like, subscribe, share, comment, all that stuff if you enjoyed the video. I will see you next time.